It's lights out, everybody, and welcome back to the Low Downforce podcast, the for-friend Formula One podcast. You have myself, Ben, you have Matt, J9, and Josh all here, and we are back with another episode in our F101 series. So for all of you new fans or just fans that need a little refresher on all that goes on in Formula One, we have created this series, taken bite-sized chunks of Formula One, explaining them, not too into the weeds, but with a little detail to get you caught up and ready and understanding all of the action that is happening on track all season long. And so we are back this time talking about flags and penalties. So another 2-for-1 special. They go a little hand in hand. So we decided to bunch them together. And yeah, it's another part of races, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but drivers have to be aware of the flags and the penalties that may come with them. So it is an important part of the sport that we got to get into.
Absolutely. And speaking of being aware of the flags, back in the day, for like the longest time, there would just be some guy, like a marshal on the side of the track, flying a flag as hard as he can, or she, obviously, like anyone could do, you're flying flags.
What a save.
But at the end of the day, now these days, before I get into some of the more common flags, you actually have electronic panels. So you'll actually see it as you're driving by it. It's got a little screen and it shows, green, yellow, red. We'll get into more of them too. And then there's driver dashboards, team radio. So people are constantly aware, and that has really changed things up. But what has not changed up in a long time is our standard flags. So I think everyone knows the checkered flag. I'm going to get there in a second. But the green flag, as you watch the race, you'll see that there's a person standing behind all the cars as the race is about to get going, waving a green flag. That means that the race is good to resume. So you'll see a green flag not only when we start the race, but every time that there are conditions that cause a yellow or a red flag, which I'll talk about in a second, have cleared, and everyone is good to resume racing. And there's two kinds of flags that really impact essentially the way that the track allows people to drive. So yellow flags, you can have a single yellow or a double yellow, and either one essentially says there's danger ahead. So a single yellow flag says, hey, slow down, be ready to react. There's some kind of hazard on the circuit. And then double yellow says, okay, this is a serious hazard. Really, be ready to stop. But not necessarily are we going to stop the race. That happens when there's a red flag. So a red flag entirely stops the session. And if you watched any races before, a red flag can absolutely just disrail everything that's going on. Somebody could be in first, 30 seconds ahead of second place, and all of a sudden, everyone heads to the pits. So that's what happens is everybody heads to the pits and awaits further instructions, and the race is entirely stopped. When they're ready, they could reinstate a yellow flag if they really wanted to. Most of the time, they wait until there's clear conditions, and they'll fly a green flag, and everyone's ready to get back at it. And the last one that I'll let you guys know about is the checkered flag. And this is the most notorious, especially if you watch cars or you watch NASCAR, right? Everyone knows the checkered flag. That is saying that the session is over, and it actually is flown. And a lot of people may not know this. It's flown at the end of qualifying, right? It's flown at the end of a sprint race or a race itself. So all the times that a serious session is concluded, you'll see that checkered flag, and that's how you know that the race is all set and finished.
And those are all the pretty standard flags. But there's also a handful of flags that are not quite as standard that get used much less frequently, but are still used, and they usually can lead to penalties. So there's the black and white flag, which is actually just a warning to a driver for unsportsmanlike behavior, for forcing another driver off the track, something like that, to warn them not to do it again. Sometimes track limits, they'll get a warning, stuff like that. A black flag disqualifies the driver. So if the driver were to continually ignore the black and white flag, or they're just completely driving in an unsafe manner, or something that the head race officials determine is not allowed whatsoever, you get a black flag. And this rarely happens, but because they can award other penalties instead, but it can happen. And then there's also a blue flag. So if a car gets lapped and they're going super slow, and the fast car has behind them that's ahead of them catches up, the slower car will get a blue flag instructing them to let the faster car back or ahead of them. And if they don't slow down and they continue racing the car that's a whole lap ahead of them, they can end up with a penalty that way. There's also a meatball flag and a few other weird flags that just like never happen. So if you want to hear about them, ask us in the comments, but you don't need to hear about them.
Yeah, and one thing just to note real quick, obviously black and white flag could be confusing if you're thinking about the checkered flag, which is also black and white. This one is going to be diagonally cut in half between white and black. So just make sure that if you see a checkered flag, you don't think that anyone's getting a penalty.
Yeah, and then there are some interesting penalties. We'll first start off with the common ones that you'll see. And they kind of make sense. And a lot of these penalties are safety based. Again, these cars are going sometimes over 200 miles an hour. Safety has to be the number one thing that we have to look out for, because this isn't your normal, I got in a car accident. And even those are significantly terrible. This is worse. And so whenever these things happen, you're really trying to avoid not just the yellow flag, not just the red flags, even yellow flags can be a driver's safety is in danger. And so these common penalties really happen fairly often within races, and you'll see that at the beginning of the season. And as we get into certain races are going to be more common for certain penalties. So what are common penalties? Number one, I think it's a big one, causing a collision. As a driver, you want to be obviously racing the fastest that you can, but sometimes you're going to cause a collision, and that's going to be significant based on how significant it is. And sometimes you can understand the driver's intention. It can be a 5-second penalty. It can be a 10-second penalty. Or, I mean, if it's very significant, it could be all the way to you're penalized for the race and you're disqualified, but likely that's not going to happen in your common penalty. So typically you're going to see a 5-second penalty or a 10-second penalty. You will sometimes see penalties where they have to, at their next pit stop, sit there for 5 or 10 seconds before the pit crew can do anything to the car. Sometimes you'll see that, or it'll just be added on to your end result. Sometimes you can see a penalty happen where if you overtake another car, you pass them, but it could have been a little bit iffy in how you did it. They will just make you have that car go around you again. And so you kind of have to back off for a little bit while they try to go around you. So causing a collision, definitely important. You can't do that. Number two, what you can't do is track limits. And we've talked about this in another F101 episode in talking about your track limits of getting off of the track. So if all 4 wheels of your car are off the track, that's called exceeding your track limits. And that means you are assessed a penalty for doing so. You cannot go off the track and come back on. We oftentimes see that as cars are going on turns and trying to overtake another car. And so, sometimes you have to swerve while that car's swerving and your car gets off, or you're trying to go around them and you kind of just eyeball it wrong a little bit, get the wrong angle at the speed that you're going, and you come off the track. If that happens, you are typically told to either let that car pass you again, or you're assessed a 5 or maybe a 10-second, but typically a 5-second infraction. And then that also gets into forcing another driver off track. Again, sometimes that happens as you're taking a curve or as you're going around a different part of the track. But if you intentionally force a driver off the track, oftentimes that can be dangerous and you will be given a penalty. Those are in-race penalties and often safety related. Another big safety one that you will see pretty much maybe every race or every other race would be some of the technical violations or the technical infractions that you'll see. Similar to being in your neighborhood, you can't go over a certain mile per hour. It is the same thing in the pit lane. You have a lot of people in the pits who obviously aren't in cars. They are normal human beings. I like to think of them as pedestrians. You can't be speeding in the pit lane. And so sometimes you will see that, and drivers typically will maybe get a fine or a time penalty. So it's all about safety. You can't put other people's safety in jeopardy. And then I would say the other biggest one that you'll see, and it absolutely makes sense for any type of sport that you see where there is a 1, 2, 3, go situation, think in track, other types of racing, you want to make sure that you're not jump starting. You're not going before that light turns green. So you will be given a time penalty if you do a jump start and try to start before everyone else. Those are some of the common penalties that you'll see. And typically the broadcaster, while you're watching, will say, oh, that person, because of that overtake or because they went off the track, they will let you know, hey, this is the penalty that they're going to receive. This is what's going to happen. And you'll see that typically on the TV as well.
So J9 started to hint at it a little bit, but you have to serve different penalties in different ways. So we've only talked about the race. You can get assessed penalties in practices. You can get assessed penalties in qualifying. They all have different effects, different outcomes, things like that. So to continue talking about races, if you are assessed a penalty, you have to serve it on your next pit stop. If you are given a 5-second penalty, when you pull into the pits and come to a complete stop in front of your garage, and that's when normally the mechanics would start working on your car. If you have a 5-second penalty, you have to wait 5 seconds before the mechanics can touch your car. If it's 10-second penalty, they have to wait 10 seconds. And so that's the main and easiest way to serve those penalties. But say you've already done your pit stop and you have a 10-second penalty, when you finish the race, 10 seconds will be added on to your total race time. And if that bumps you down a few spots, then it bumps you down a few spots. If it's a really close race, if Matt was talking about a red flag or yellow flag, if it bunches the pack together, 5 seconds even could bump you down 4, 5, 6, 7 spots out of the points entirely. So you got to serve these penalties. It's super important too, because if you don't serve a penalty during a race or your time is tacked onto the end, then that penalty affects your grid position the following race. So the only case that really happens is if Jay and I talked about one of the common penalties is causing a collision. If you cause a collision and you're given a 10-second penalty, but the collision caused you to have to immediately retire from the race, then you can't serve that penalty in the pits, and you can't really tack it onto your time at the end of the race because you never finished the race. And so that penalty could show up as what is called a grid place penalty. And that is what you get from penalties during qualifying. The most common one is impeding a driver. So if you do something on the track that makes another driver have to slow down, ruin their qualifying lap, then you can be assessed a grid penalty. Usually it is a 3-place grid penalty. And it's basically wherever you qualify, that normally sets the grid. You will be bumped down 3 spots, and those drivers, those 3 affected drivers, will each move up a spot. The only time you really see more or higher grid place penalties is, Jay and I was talking about some of the technical stuff a little bit, is Formula One requires that you only, for example, use 4 engines in a whole season. If enough of them get damaged, you have to use a 5th engine. If you have to use components beyond the rules of the game, then you will take sometimes 5, sometimes 10 place grid penalties for adding those components, for effectively going over budget. In practice, most of the penalties are usually fines or slap on the wrist, because practices are important sessions, but they are not like official time sessions. And so you don't want that to affect the rest of somebody's race weekend. So continuing on with some of the common penalties, most penalties you will see are 5 to 10 seconds, but there's a couple more, again, safety related, very severe penalties. So one of the big ones is called a drive-through penalty. And this is more extreme than, say, a 10-second penalty, because you are required to, And usually within 3 laps of being handed the penalty, you have to drive through the pits. You don't have to stop at your garage, but you have to drive through the pits instead of going down the main straight. And as J9 mentioned, there is a much, much slower speed limit in the pits. So that effectively becomes like a 20 or 25 second penalty. And then the most egregious time penalty you can get, and we saw this from Lando Norris in Qatar last year for speeding under a double yellow flag when he was told to slow down, is he got what is called a stop-go penalty. And so it's basically like the drive-through penalty I just mentioned, plus a normal time penalty on top of that. So instead of just driving through the pits, he has to drive into the pits, stop at his garage, wait 10 seconds usually, and then leave the pits without any maintenance, anything done like that. So that usually winds up being 30 plus seconds. That will obliterate your race. Even if you are doing super well, I think in the instance last year, I think Lando served the penalty from second place, came out of the pits in 14th place, and barely squeaked back to 10th for the final point. Like that will ruin your race. And the reason all of this matters, and the main thing that enforces not committing penalties, if you can help it, is Formula One has a penalty system, a point system. So depending on how egregious your penalty is, you can get somewhere between 0 and 3 penalty points.
It's almost like points on your license. Sorry.
Exactly. Spot on.
Yeah.
So if you accrue 12 points in a 12-month span, even if that spans 2 seasons, that if you hit that 12 points, you have to serve a 1-race suspension. You cannot race. We actually saw the first ever suspension via this point system last season with Kevin Magnussen, one of the Haas drivers, who a little bit of reckless driving, a lot of penalties accrued pretty quickly. He had to miss an entire race, which when every race matters, when points are the difference between first place, second place, third place in the championship, and tens of $1 million that are associated with it, you don't want to miss races. So the penalties and the penalty point system kind of all tie in together. That is a lot of information. There are a lot of very obscure, very unique penalties that even we're learning. So if something is still confusing, if you have a question about a specific flag or a penalty that we didn't mention or you want more clarification, let us know on socials at Low Downforce Pod. We will happily either answer it directly or make another F101 episode to clarify things. But thank you for tuning in. Continue joining us on this journey. If you are new or you need the refresher, keep checking out these F101 episodes, both the ones we've already made and any upcoming ones that we might make. But we will talk to you very, very soon. Until then, stay speedy. Goodbye.